Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this month's webinar. LEGAMUS, a reading method practicum presented by the North American Cambridge Classics Project and sponsored by Cambridge University Press. I'm Martha Altieri, and I would like to welcome Stephanie Giganti and William Lee as our guest presenters this evening. They have done many webinars for us and have been active presenters at our summer workshops. Stephanie teaches at Ridgewood High School in New Jersey. She's also an NACCP board member, and she's a certified Google trainer, a Pear Deck and Kami certified trainer, and also a technology innovation specialist in her school district. And William has all sorts of things that I could tell you about, but he teaches at Tom Clark High School in San Antonio, Texas, and he's been teaching Latin with the Cambridge Latin course for 22 years now. He was recently selected as the Foreign Language Teacher of the Year in Texas. He's taught every level of middle school and high school Latin through AP. He also is serving as the president of the San Antonio Classical Society. And he's also helped edit many of the materials for Cambridge University Press. He's a state co-chair of the Texas Junior Classical League. He's been a Kertamen chair for the National Junior Classical League. He was also the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the American Classical League, and the list goes on. And I am delighted to have both of these extraordinary teachers with us this evening. And welcome, Stephanie and William.
Salute, omnes.
Salute. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Martha.
Yes, thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our redux on the reading method. Here's our contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us, either via Twitter or email. And if you'd like to follow along with the presentation, you can scan the QR code or type in that URL, tinyurl.com/3-31-NACCP. And I'll give you guys a few minutes to, like 30 seconds, we'll do a 30-second countdown to scan the barcode or to type in the URL so you can have access to our presentation.
Sometimes in my class, I'll give them, 20 seconds to finish something, and I'll count down in Latin from 20. And it's really just to give them that repetitive practice with the numbers. And once in a while, it just kind of catches me. Like it's actually not, natural to count backwards in Latin. Counting up is easy peasy, but counting backwards requires
backwards.
a level. Yeah.
I'm with you, because sometimes I'm like, wait, did I just say decum?
Yeah.
So queen decum?
Right.
So, but here's quid agemus hodie, our cursus hodiernis tonight. And so we're going to be talking about review the backgrounds of the reading method a little bit, and how the reading method works, and then things to consider when we're doing our lesson planning. And we're going to provide you guys some time at the very end to do a practicum with some stories and activities and whatnot. And as we've said before, this is a redux of the reading method. And so here is a QR code that you can use to access the recording from our fall webinar. And this is where we do a shameless self-plugging. If you click on that link, with the presentation following along, or if you can scan the barcode, that will take you to the recording, but also it's going to ask you for a password. And so you can go to the NACCP training site. And for those of you who are not familiar with the NACCP site, it's cambridgelatin.org. And Stephanie has put in tonight's presentation also into the chat that you can access that as well if you just click on that. And if you click on the training site, as you can see, all our webinars to register, they're up here. But if you go down to the recordings are available, all of our previous webinars on assessments, everyone's webinars on here, like Semi Smith, all of our Stephanie DeGonti and Spalding, right? And Maureen had done a really good job with supplementing CLC with authentic Latin resources. The list goes on. And so if you go down to this part, intro to the reading method, that will be the passcode that you enter into the.
And you do have to type in
link.
the passcode. You can't just copy and paste it. I found that out the hard way.
Yeah, you actually do have to type it in. They don't like it when you.
They think you're a robot.
Right? Like copy and pasting. Who would have thought, right?
Right.
And also for those of you who are interested, QR code, they have improved a whole lot. And so we have gone from just a normal QR code generator to you can embed things. And so, of course, I decided to embed Caecilius's statue bust today. And for those of you who are interested in how to generate a QR code using that, like inserting your own images, QR code -monkey, or if you just do a Google search on QR code monkey, it allows you to do all kinds of neat stuff if you want to have your own customized QR codes. And so that will be our shameless self-plug right there. But I also want to kind of do a social emotional check. This is that time of the year when we're feeling a lot of stress. And this is something that I've been doing with my students this year. And so I want to go ahead and do that with you as well. I'm going to put the link into the chat. And so if everyone could go ahead and click on that and just kind of let me know how you guys are feeling this week. And I need to give credit where it's due. I got this idea informed from one of my colleagues, Timothy Castillo. He's very big with social and emotional learning. And I think coming out of pandemic, we definitely need to keep that in mind with our students. And I always ask them how they're doing. Always talk about how, what is one positive thing that happened. And so a goal that you set for yourself for this grading cycle, and anything that they'd like to share with me. And one of the caveats I do want to give is if you use this, definitely make sure you do read it and not just, do it full pro forma, as they say, because sometimes there are things that will come up that will require you to actually go get an administrator or speak to a counselor. I have found that students can be very frank. And so sometimes they're not able to share things with you in person, but on Google Forms, they are able to share things with you. So I see that there's a question about Zoom survey. Certainly I can do a Zoom survey, but I do collect these and save it on my drive just as a backup and as documentation as well. And so that's why I prefer this, because I can share that with my admins easily.
Yeah, and I guess that's good too, because you can track feelings over an extended period of time. So if you notice that over like a 2-week period, somebody's smiley face is, kind of decreasing on a regular basis, you can kind of see that pattern and say, wait a second, let me step in and work with that student or address it, or maybe address an admin. Or, in the same vein, if a student goes from optime to, pessime all in one 24-hour period of time, maybe something's up, and maybe that's something that you'd want to investigate.
Yeah, and definitely those are things that we want to keep in mind as we come out of this pandemic and work with students as well. And so I kind of want to take a temperature as well for you guys tonight. And so I'm going to use a Mentimeter to do that. So let me go ahead and do a new share.
And while you're doing your share, I do like the fact that you're your mental health check, it's using Latin vocabulary too, because one of the things that we're addressing tonight is the importance of using the reading method for communicative purposes. And quite often students don't necessarily see the direct connection, I guess, between their Latin studies that they're reading in their text with the real world that's happening around them. And so the more opportunities we can use to, bridge that gap and to divide it and to make sure that they are connecting the language that's in their books with the language of the world around them, I think the better off our students are.
Yes. And so if you could go to www.menti.com and use the code A205-0625. I'm also going to copy the link and put that in the chat so you have access to that as well. And then I'll show you what the responses will look like. So here's the question: what are the first words that come to your mind when you hear the term reading method? So give you a little bit of time to kind of put in some words.
Yes. Well, thanks
Okay.
for bringing that on my program. I appreciate it.
And here's the next question. So we have, okay, so here are the results that we have. So reading, intimidating, extensive, understanding, engaging, literature. Hopefully we can help you with the intimidating part. Please don't feel intimidated, because I think coming from a grammar translation background to learning how to teach a reading method myself, I understand it could be very intimidating to start, but it definitely is a way to engage a student, to get them, as Stephanie said, more communicative and using a language a lot more than the grammar translation method. And again, not to knock the grammar translation method, because I think that has worked well with a lot of students as well. So kind of gauge the interest of your students and see what works best for you. Okay, so let's go to the next question. If you're using CLC, provide a stage or story that you're working right now, that you're working on right now, so that you like some ideas or help, whatever. And that kind of will give us an idea, because we kind of picked a stage for you to do a practicum, and we'll see if you guys are kind of on the same page. And so if not, we can certainly talk about some of the ideas for some of these stages as well. So I see stage 45, stage 29, and 11 candidatos. That's a good one. 21.
Oh.
I mean, in an ideal world, we'd be able to talk about all of these stages in one night, but I think both William and I would feel comfortable kind of going through some of the major elements of those stages tonight with you, because we do really want to help you where you are, and not necessarily just sort of like talk about the generalized future of your pedagogy. We want to, be able to give you something that's tangible and fungible that you can just turn around and use in your classroom either tomorrow, next week, after spring break, or, whenever you have that opportunity.
Definitely. And so let me go back to our slideshow here. So we're going to talk about the reading background a little bit. And so Stephanie, you want to talk about Chomsky?
Sure. We alluded to this a lot in our initial webinar. So if you're accessing the recording, you can hear even more details about this. So I don't want to, bore everyone with a complete repetition, but the influence or the Cambridge Latin course was not just sort of born in a vacuum. It was definitely born with respect to the research about language acquisition. And of course, you can't talk about language acquisition without Chomsky. And so, he really has put forth those ideas about syntax, but using context and syntax for the communicative process, and that the whole of language influences specific syntactical patterns. And I always liken this to raising children. I'm not sure how many of you have had that privilege in your life, but watching my own children grow up and learn language and whatnot, and watching them practice words here and there, and they're listening to us and they're reproducing it, little phrases at a time, and eventually they figure out that it's run and ran, but for a while they'll say runned or something like that until they kind of get the general practice of one of those sort of exceptional past tenses. So it's really that repetition, but it's also hearing it in the context of something larger. If my son said run, I would say something like, I ran today too. And then I would kind of give him that context for understanding the whole of language. But I never said, oh, no, you did not mean run, because that's not a correct grammar. And we talked, when you're raising children and whatnot, you're raising them to understand language as a whole. And so the aim of the CLC, and of course our aim in our classroom, is to do the same type of thing with Latin as well. To continue repeating phrases and words in meaningful ways so that students are able to grasp meaning and to grasp fundamental structures of grammar without realizing that that's even what they're doing. And just sort of as a quick, for example, in my classroom, whenever my students have to open their textbooks, right? I don't usually say, I almost never say open your textbooks. I say aperite libros, or aperite libros de notis for notebooks. We started with the blue book in Latin too, and we moved to the green book. So it's libros caeruleos or libros virides, so they can understand the color function. And then, it was interesting because they were all sitting for the National Latin exam, and one of the questions had to do with color. And they're like, I know that one. I know the Caeruleus book, right? Because they, if I had said just in passing in the hallway, like, hey, student X, what is this? What does Caeruleus mean? They would probably be like, I don't know. But the more times I said aperite libros caeruleos, they put it together that that's what I would want. And then, someone was asking earlier about stage 19. Little commands like that help that repetition of what the imperative looks like and sounds like, and the purpose of having an imperative too. So I'll instruct the entire class aperite libros virides, and then if one student hasn't taken their textbook out yet, I'll single them out and say, student X, aperi librum viridem, and I kind of show them the difference between singulars and plurals, and addressing certain people. So it's an influence like that really focuses on whole language usage without, nicking the kids on, you didn't use this specific ending correctly. It's modeling it, but it's also showing them that connection between the language that they're using or seeing in the stories and what they're, what language they would normally be using in a communicative sense.
Yeah, and I cannot agree more. We want to encourage the students to take risks, right? And so they tend to shut down when you tell them, oh, no, you really should have said this, right? Like you want to be as encouraging as you can. And so instead of saying, oh, that's not correct, you should have done this, definitely just kind of model the correct way to say something. And the more they hear it, the better they're going to do in acquiring that language usage, right, in their own in their own environment. And so definitely we need to support that as much as we can. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the imperatives in stage 19, because that's a great opportunity for you to do Simonis Dicit or Kaiser Dicit to help you review and help them review the imperative forms, right? And so it's a lot of fun. It gets them up and about. And so it's a great activity to include. And so again, this is all based on Chomsky. And so again, the Cambridge Latin course is not, it wasn't just randomly put together. And so the Cambridge School Classics Project then consulted with an early linguistic consultant, Dr. John B. Wilkins, and he devised a course that basically does all these things. And so with the aim that they want them to read authentic Latin literature at the very end. And again, if you want to have more background on these, we encourage you to go back and view our webinar from the fall. And of course, we have Christian, who says we acquire language when we understand messages. And that's something that we just, cannot agree enough with, especially with the aims of the reading method.
Yeah, and for what it's worth too, you can listen to us, but you can also read a lot of this background in the teacher's manual for each of the levels of Cambridge Latin course. There's a lot of really solid information about the connection of language studies for acquisition and the Cambridge Latin course stories and why they were chosen and how they were written, etc. So, we don't really have time to go as deep as the teacher's manual does, but there's a lot of information there for you.
And so we definitely want to kind of review the aims of the reading method, which is to teach the comprehension of Latin with emphasis on the 1st century AD/CE.
And, of course, to develop an understanding of the content, the style, and the values of Roman civilizations through their writing. And one really clear example of this, I happen to be in the middle of right now. I'm in stage 25 with my students, and we are reading the antics of Modestus and Strithio, and they are soldiers in the army. And so we talk about the organization of the army, we talk about the responsibilities of soldiers and the training mechanisms and what they're expected to do. And at the exact same time that I'm doing this, in my AP course, we're reading Caesar's De Bello Gallico, and we are talking about the preparations of the soldiers and how Sabinus was not prepared for his responsibilities, and how Modestus is doing all these sort of silly things, and it looks like he's kind of goofing around. Well, how does that goofing around play out with Modestus's abdication of his responsibilities, and how does Sabinus abdicate his responsibilities? And obviously there's no direct conversation between my level 2 students and my level 5 students, but the conversations are the same. And so if you can prepare your level 2 students to have these pretty sophisticated level conversations about the Roman military and why people are doing things that they're doing, you're really engaging that sphere in their brain that's going to recycle the same types of conversation when they get to upper levels. So, depending on the terminal goals of your Latin program, the reading method really does help to prepare that part of the student's brain.
Absolutely. And again, I want to reiterate that, it's not an end in itself, but it provides an access to the literature and culture. So everything kind of are interconnected, because we really cannot have one without the other. And so all the cultures embedded in our readings, and then through the readings, we're exploring, the ancient Romans and the Greeks. And so it's so important to give them that context.
Yeah, and with respect to using the narratives as literature, I do also value in my classroom talking about literature and talking about books. I actually have a whiteboard in the front of my room, and it actually portrays on a regular basis what I'm reading at home. And I don't necessarily talk about it in the classroom, but I want to demonstrate to students that reading is a lifelong thing that you can do, and you can read stories and you can get into it. And the more I can also get into the stories that we're reading in class, the more the students are really latching onto it too. I mean, I have nothing against a book like Gilgamesh or whatever, but I feel like that's kind of a hard book to really like liven up and, you know, kind of talk about the characters and the conflicts and stuff like that. I haven't ever taught Gilgamesh, so what do I know? But the point is, you know, the reading any type of literature is healthy for the students, and it's a good chance for them to really explore all the dynamics of what literature is. And so, you know, seeing their teacher read it and enjoy it and participate in it as a piece of literature is, I think, a really powerful experience for students.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you, Stephanie. And just think about the books that we read for pleasure, right? Like, are we poring over every single word? Are we reading, and come to a grinding halt? If we encounter a word that didn't make sense to us, we don't. And so part of the reading method involves speed, and trying to figure out meaning as we read. And it's the same thing can be applied in our classrooms when we're teaching. So everything works together, and the more we read, the better readers will become. So
And I think at this point in the year too, it's appropriate for a salient discussion of where you are in your curriculum in March versus where you're going to need to be in May or June, whenever you end your year. And when you're doing the reading method and you're reading a lot of stories, I think it's easy to, as the slide indicated, to kind of get bogged down and to feel like, oh my gosh, there's so many stories between me and the last day of school. How am I going to get through it? And, we were just talking before we went live tonight about, the pacing of our own classes and how quickly we thought we were paced and how appropriately we thought. And, one thing that I would like to bring then to our audience too, is that, we've been teaching Cambridge for a while, we've been in the game for a while, and we're still having the same types of conversations about, the stressors that are waiting for us and the curricular pressures. And, so it's not, no one is ever doing anything wrong, and we will always have the same common themes of what it means to be in the classroom and what it means to balance the reading method with the time that we're given to do the reading method too. So if you're starting at for the first time this year or next year, or you're only in your third year or something like that, and you feel like you're sort of like lost, or you're really anxious about it, please know that we are all at very stressful points in the year, for one, but we are all working through it, and I think as long as you are still adhering to sort of the goals and the ideals of the reading program, you're still helping your students, and you are still benefiting them by approaching the stories as lively as possible, as energetically as possible, and as comprehensively as possible too, because they're still getting something from you. And so, at this point in the year too, the great Cambridge maxim is that of all, most, and some. Look around your classroom for any story or grammar principle or culture content, and think about the fact that you really want all of your students to have a certain portion of the knowledge that you're about to offer them. So let's say you have, a presentation with all of the information about the organization of the military, all of those roles and ranks and those numbers and everything. Okay, I have this presentation. What do I want all of them to know? I want all of them to leave my classroom knowing that a legion's about 5,000 men, give or take, that the Roman army was highly organized, and that they had a variety of different weapons for both offense and defense. Now, I want most of them to be able to know that it wasn't just a single legion, that there were other divisions within the legion, and that there were different types of armor based on the type of setting that they would be fighting in. And then you think about the sum. So the sum is maybe, I don't know, it's not really a numbers game. I don't want to say a percentage or anything like that, but think of those some kids who you think are probably going to be going on to, at some point, the AP or the IB or the advanced literature level of a Latin program. What do you want them to be able to take away? For the some in the current conversation, I might say, I'd like for them to know a contubernarium is 8 men. I'd like to know them to know that a century is 80, even though the word century is 100. I would like for them to know that scutum is a neuter noun, little things like that. Those are the things you can kind of go next level with. But if you can imagine each of your lessons or each of your units of study, accessible to all in some ways, accessible to most in some ways, and accessible to some in a few ways. And I think that that'll help you to really distill the importance of what you're doing with each of the lessons, each of the stories, each of the stages, etc. And especially as you're approaching that end of the year too, in which you really want to make sure that you're pacing it properly for the students who are advancing, as well as not going too slow, not going too fast, and you're trying to balance all of those demands at the same time. So William, did you want to go into a little bit more detail about what this means?
Yeah, and so again, if you look, we want the students to know all these, again, all of our students know certain facts of the stories or of the storylines or within the grammar, right? And some or most. And so these are things that you can think about. And in the teacher's manual as well, we keep bringing those things back. It does tell you too, if you're, at a crunch for time, which stories that you can skip, or go over very quickly with the student. And so I know we're at that time of the year where we're feeling, as Stephanie said, that curricular pressure. And so this is a time to kind of start thinking about, what do I want my kids to know? And I cannot stress enough that you know your kids best, right? And you have to do what's best for your kids, even if it's not fitting the curriculum. You don't have, the textbook is just there. It's a vehicle, right? Like, that's not the curriculum. You are the one who's going to provide them with instruction. Coming out of this pandemic, kids are all different. They're all at different places. You know what's best for the kids. So I cannot stress enough to, just think about your kids when you're planning these things. And even if you don't get to where you normally get to, or where you want, or where you're dictated to get to, it's okay. We're all in the same boat. It'll be okay. So in the reading method, again, we want to create that environment of super low anxiety, right? And so I cannot stress enough to be positive with them all the time, and also allow them to make mistakes, right? It's okay to make mistakes as long as you're not correcting them, you're just modeling what's the correct way to say it, or to say something, to read something. And so the more you do that, the more they're going to catch on.
Yeah, and I also believe from that standpoint too, in the power of positive reinforcement. A student might be inaccurate about one detail in the thing that he notes about the story or the question that he answers. But if he even remembers something from 2 or 3 stages ago, we celebrate those moments, and we want them to make those long-term connections between the characters and the conflicts. And we want them to be able to really track these storylines over 3 different units of study, or 4 different units of study, really. But we want to be able to, celebrate those moments too, because, I think one of the big things that we've all learned in the last 2 years is really the importance of having a positive and supportive teacher by the side of the students, because as our students are experiencing the world in a lot of, fractured and difficult ways, to have a teacher who believes in them and who celebrates even little victories, like, I appreciate that you did that one thing. And this well, okay. I was gonna say something else, but it was off on a tangent. But so, one of the other hallmarks of the reading approach with Cambridge Latin Course is essentially to read a story thrice. Now, I say that knowing full well that one of you mentioned in the Mentimeter that the reading method is intimidating to you. So I don't want you to think that I'm actually suggesting that you do 3 different activities for every single story, because you will drive yourself nuts. I know that. But there are a number of different ways that you can sort of warm up the kids' brains to receive the information of a story. But it is important to make sure that you're, sort of recycling and rehashing your approach to each story based on where it is in the stage, where it is in the unit, and where it is in your curriculum. So before you get to a story, preview the text, just kind of give a quick gander, like what vocab do you know? Just shout out, 10 words, or each person identify just one word that you know from the story, right? It's something very simple, takes 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be a really long, period long activity. Activate and build background knowledge. Ask, where were we at the end of the last story? What were you wondering at the end of the last story? Or what characters what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the Salvius storyline, or are we talking about Modestus and Strithio? Make cultural connections in terms of previewing the things that people are wearing, or in stage 25 they're at the military camp, so why are they at the military camp? What happens at a military camp? And then making predictions about the content, and you can do that just based on just the title of the story. And I often do that. I ask the students, okay, it's called Modestus Custos, and the word custos is given to them and it means guard. So okay, what does it mean to have the title of the story, Modestus the Guard, and then have them, activate that and translate it into, not translate the story, but translate the title into a direction that they believe the story might go.
And during the reading, we definitely want to check their understanding constantly, either tell them to paraphrase the text for us, or have them draw. I love illustrations. And we use whiteboard.io, or an actual physical whiteboard, and just say, hey, draw this scene, and sometimes I'll read the Latin to them. And so in some of the stories lend themselves to being illustrated, right? Like, for example, the story where Domitian is about to dedicate the art to Titus, or he is dedicating the art to Titus. So draw out that the procession, right? And in fact, all the Pompa stories, think about it. Those Pompa stories in every single one of those textbooks, it's a great way for you to read to them and for them to illustrate and show that they understand what's happening. And, again, bringing images as much as possible. And you want to talk about the concepts and kind of think about, okay, so think way back when we talked about the deponent participles, right? Having been instead of so it's having blanked instead of having been. And so think back to laudatus est. So it's having been blanked, it's now has been blanked. So having blanked will be okay, so kind of tie that in. And definitely have backups, right, while you're reading, because sometimes they they have that look on their face. They're like the glazed over look. And I'm gonna admit, this year, I think that the kids are tired, we're tired, they're tired. And so sometimes 10 minutes in, you're like, oh, gotta change it up, gotta get them moving, or else they're gonna lose it. So definitely have a backup plan.
Yeah. And one other thing, I do brain breaks in my classroom all the time. I try not to let them sit for more than 20 to 30 minutes or so. And we have 80-minute periods twice a day. So, that does tend to be like really important. So sometimes if we're in the middle of like a long story-based activity, the brain break is nothing more than everyone stops what they're doing, stands up, goes to the other side of the room, and finds someone and tells them something that they are looking forward to in the story, something they don't understand, or, your favorite thing that the character did, or, make a prediction, whatever it is. It's story-based. And the brain break is really just walk across the room and talk to somebody and just have a conversation.
Or just have them, practice mindfulness, right? Stand up, deep, close their eyes, take, breathe in, breathe out for 5-10 seconds. You'll be really surprised at what that can do for your students.
So the 3-part story reading, it starts with like a pre-reading activity, sentence, question, something like that. The full reading activity of taking in the story and making meaning of it. And then there's the important part of afterwards, right? We don't want to just sort of leave each story in that period, so that as soon as that bell rings, they don't have to think about Modestus and Strithio anymore. They can move on to something else. Go back to it and make sure that they understand that it's part of a sequence and it's building, and that there are, rising actions that are not just within the story itself, but within each stage too. So the more connections you can help them make, the better off. So, summarize what they've been reading, or sometimes even in just like a close activity, like a closed translation, and they're sort of filling in the blanks. I think that sometimes they kind of get bogged down with just what's the right answer. So I stop them after they finish that activity. Okay, a quick deep reading, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about it, so that they're not just, looking to check the box and complete an activity, that they're actually still engaging in what the narrative has to say from that activity too.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the close exercise. So, and again, we're using the term close exercise, but for those of you who are not familiar, it's another term for fill in the blanks. And so they basically have to read and then fill in the blanks of the translation that you provide for them. And so that can definitely help you speed things up a little bit. And I use that from Latin 1 all the way to AP as well. And one of the things that I started doing lately is, again, I want to get them moving about. I want to do things where I try to get them as engaged as possible. And so I have thrown in competition, a competitive aspect of it now. And so I pair them up, right? And so one person will be the scribe, the other person will be the writer, and then I give them an unspecified amount of time. But I have now downloaded a noise maker of all kinds of funny sounds, and so it's like if they hear the nuclear explosion, so that's time to switch, right? And so then they switch roles, so you have someone else who's going to be writing, and then the new person is going to be looking up the words or whatever, but they have to read together still. And so the more things you can do with them to make it so that it's not monotonous and doing the same thing over and over again, that definitely helps. And you can also do things like dictatio currens, running dictations, things like that to help them get engaged with the reading. And Stephanie has a great document that she would like to share with y'all.
Yeah, and actually, if you have the presentation, you can actually click on this and you can get to the document too. It should be shared. Here we go. Yay. So 42 ways to read a story. Oh my goodness. And no joke, this is starred in my Google Drive because I refer to this frequently. I have a bunch of activities for a bunch of different stories, but every now and again, I look at my existing activity and I'm like, I don't know, it's a Friday, it's right before a long weekend or something. I don't really want to do my existing activity. What else can I do that would be really engaging to the kids? And whereas we don't have time tonight to talk about all of these various methods, I will dangle the carrot that over the summer, NACCP is bringing back their summer workshops, and the specific details will be released pretty soon, actually. We're going to have a 3-day novice workshop and a 3-day experienced workshop for the different levels of proficiency with NACCP or with the Cambridge Latin course. And in one of those sessions, we will be doing a great justice to that document of 42 ways to read a story. But we don't have time tonight to do all of them. But one of the things that I thought I could show you in this Exerceamos section is how I am currently dealing with stage 25. And just to perhaps whet your appetite about what else is to come. So stage 25, for reference, starts in the Roman camp of Deva. And it's really about Modestus and Strithio. And the sort of third silent character is this guy in the blue, whose name is Recobrix. And Recobrix is a spy, but he's actually from a British tribe from beyond the camp. So there are a bunch of different stories, and I just kind of wanted to show you a little bit about what I do with the reading method to make it accessible to students, to get them to think about the Latin in a communicative way. And so, William, would you mind if I took the reins for a few minutes just to show?
No, not at all. Absolutely, go for it.
Okay.
I'll stop share and you can take the reins.
Okay, let me just get the, oh, sorry, I had the wrong window open. Okay. So the first story in stage 25, and I don't presume that anybody has, memorized all of Cambridge Latin course, but the first story is about Strithio, who is the, comic antic partner of Modestus. And he gets asked by the second in command to go guard the jail because they have this, super important prisoner who's there. And so it's a conversation really between Strithio and his commanding officer. And Shruti is kind of a bumbling idiot, and he's written in a funny way, and the kids kind of get into it. But I wanted them to look at a conversation between two Romans and think about what that conversation sounds like in 2022. So if you saw, I gave this as an example to the kids. If you saw one of your friends getting in trouble by one of the assistant principals outside the cafeteria, what would the conversation sound like to you? Based on obviously what the original Latin had to say. So I've devised this activity, and in each of these slides, there is the optio, or the commanding officer, and then I note technically this is a picture of Modestus, but he fits the bill in terms of his mood, his affect, and his uniform, right? So it kind of matches. It matches enough. So I had them take each segment of the conversation and make it into a 2022 conversation. And I got some amazing results. I mean, I do every year because the kids, I think they get really into it. But this kind of goes back to the idea of, making language less about the syntax and the precision of each of the verbs and whatnot, and more about the affect of how people are saying the things that they're saying. So my classes still have not gotten over the fact that Strithio is ostrich. And so they call him Ostrich Man all the time. So here's the commanding officer saying, "Yo, Ostrich Man, come here." And Strithio says, "What are you doing, man? I'm looking for Modestus. He's got a girl waiting for him." "Ostrich Man, you're in deep trouble. Boss is going to throw you in the brig if you don't make up the work." I don't even know what some of these slang terms are, but I fully encourage them to use slang because I wanted them to approach language from a very holistic standpoint of, I see these words on a piece of paper, but in my mind, I'm thinking that he's saying this. So I really encourage this. I'm innocent, I didn't do it. And then he's, in the text, he says caudex, right? And this kid rendered it as buffoon. I'm not here to tweak it and say, oh no, actually the dictionary says that caudex means idiot or blockhead, because the kids don't know blockhead as an insult, but they do know buffoon. And they know this idea that, he's still being insulted, and watch your mouth, right? Like little things like that. I really appreciated the way that the kids put it into very accessible terms. So that's just an example. I don't want to go through the whole presentation tonight. The second story was about how Modestus was stepping into his role of being a guard, not effectively, as you can imagine. This was a close activity, but this was a close activity that I did from a purely language perspective. So I had translated the story, but I made errors. And so I wanted them to find the errors and make those corrections to it. So you can do things that are holistically language-based in the reading method that still speak to those, tiny, minutia of language points that you want your kids to walk away with. But this is one of those instances that after this particular close exercise, they went through a bunch of corrections, and then I had them sit with the story, and then I had them do a deep read, and I randomly called on, I had a software do this. I didn't have the audacity to do it myself. I called on 3 people to act out the story. So they had to really know what was going on, but, and be a participant in what was happening versus just, looking for the individual word choices. And then in the stage, there are there's a 3-part story of Modestus per fuga. And the parts of the story are not that long, but it is a continuous narrative that does, go on for a while. So I gave this in 3 different parts. And the first part that I gave them was Modestus per fuga. I had them illustrate it. One of the things that I've started doing with illustrations too, and I know William was saying too, like I really love having my kids draw. One of the classes that I gave this to, I gave it to them last Friday, last period of the day, right? It's spring, it's warm, they want to get outside. They don't really want to be, doing like a line by line translation of a story, but they love their colored pencils. So it's a great opportunity for them to be creative in the classroom. But one thing I've also started to do as well is that if you're looking at this particular document, they're drawing pictures, I just took the text from the story and copied it out here. But then the last row here, I wanted them to think about the story a little bit. So in the box below, write a modern day English phrase that's kind of like what Modestus says, sed Deus testes facio. Select one Latin word from the text that reflects his mood. At the end of the story, Modestus says this sentence about Strithio. How does he feel and why is his feeling ironic? Because again, these are the things that I wanted as a takeaway. So this is one of those documents that I think illustrates that concept of all, most, and some. I want them all to be able to know, the broad strokes of what happens in the story. I want them all to know that he came back to the jail and everyone was gone, right? That's the big thing, right? I want some of them to be able to illustrate some of the intricacies, right, of why Modestus shouted this or what exactly he was shouting and what he felt, etc. But I want them all to be able to look at Modestus's actions in the story and make a vocabulary specific connection. There were a number of different right answers, if you will, for this box, but it allows for a more holistic reading of what's going on, again, without that fear of a student who thinks like, if I don't know every single word in the story, then I'm not a good Latin student, right? No one likes it when their kid's like, oh no, I'm terrible at Latin, right? We're all like, no, you're great. This is an example of, giving kids who feel like they might not be great an opportunity to show that they are great because they can do one word.
Yeah, and we want to highlight those students, right? Like we want to lift them up as much as we are able. You don't have to recognize the high flyers all the time because they get recognized all the time. We want to lift up everybody, right, in your classroom. And so just to kind of reiterate, we can do different things with all these stories. I put in the chat a link to my breakout edu on Modestus Custos. If you want to, you can really just like copy that link and save it somewhere because you can share that link with your students and they can play that game all they want. Or you can make a copy of it, or you can email me and I can share that with you as well. Yeah. And so I know we're kind of running out of time. That's the issue with these webinars, right? It's like we're always running out of time. But we did promise for it to be a practicum. And so perhaps some of you guys this is where we want to get you guys to kind of put your heads together and think about things that you can do. So we have been focusing on stage 25 a little bit. And so what are some of your thoughts on things that you can do with the stage 25 story?
Or alternately, I have
pick a stage
on the someone brought up stage 19. So, are there other ways that we could think of to address the story of Dies Festus, especially with that document in hand of, various ways of reading that story?
Everyone's so quiet. It's like, are they still there? So feel free, like speak up. Glad to brainstorm and hear your thoughts.
Hi there, it's Ginny. I love to act it out.
Have
the kids take the different parts.
One of the methods in 42 Ways to Read a Story is called hot seat. And you put one student in the hot seat and they have to sort of take the perspective of one of the characters in the story. I think it might be kind of a fun activity to do a hot seat with Barbalus. Barbalus didn't want to go to the parade. Why? What's his deal? Is he sad that day? Is this the anniversary of, his wife's death or something like that? Or knowing that Galatea and Aristo are fighting the whole time. Maybe he's just trying to avoid being the third wheel in that situation. So, a hot seat type of discussion might have some avenues open to kids considering the story from a different perspective.
Or, your Quintus, right? Have them be Quintus and say, what would be your reaction? How do you feel upon observing all these things happening? How would you feel about Aristo? Do you feel for him? After hearing Helena being scolded by Galatea and all, it's just putting them in the different, it's just bringing the stories to life.
Mm-hmm.
I had my
So-
students, but this is the unit we're in right now. And so what I did today was we did a Blue Kit actually before we read the story with the new vocabulary. And my students said they really like it because they can often figure out what the words mean when there aren't that many of them, like a really short one. And then they're more confident going into the story. And then I did something which I haven't done in a while, which was each sentence was its own slide and they illustrated each of them separately. And then we put them together.
Mhm.
And we realized that, even though the story says, all these Alexandrian citizens, we don't know that everybody there was A, Alexandrian or B, citizens. So we got to talk about groups of people and things like that. But the thing that I've started doing this week is remembering like activities I haven't done in a while, because we're now starting to do more group work, and then using that same activity across all of my levels. Like, oh, I'm going to do the highlighter grab game with everybody today. So I've got less stuff to prep, but also less mental effort to do.
Yeah.
And
Micah?
you could also, all right, sorry, go ahead, William.
Do you have something to share, Micah?
Oh, not particularly at the moment. I just, since it's more interactive, I wanted to put my face on the camera. So sorry.
Yeah. Oh, so glad that you turned on your camera. Good to
Thank
put a face to a name.
A couple of other things kind of jogged my memory as I was rereading the Dies Festus story. Because it's a holiday celebration, you could easily make a Pinterest themed activity for your students. Make a Pinterest board, or like an idea board of how this holiday is celebrated. What does the celebration feel like and look like? Because Pinterest, man, you could go hog wild planning a party on Pinterest, right? So what does the party look like though, if you are celebrating Isis at this time with these people at the, with the particular ceremonies that they do. And then the other thing too, and I know all of our students love it, but make some memes, tell the story in 3 memes if you can, right? So one, it might not be enough, but try to capture some of the major feelings or the conflicts or something like that with 3 memes or 4 or something like that, and if you give your kids kind of a goal, then they can explore, they know enough of the pretty standard meme things, but there's actually, we have a game in my family called What Do You Meme? And it's sort of a basic, like you match the best caption to the meme, and then the winner, it's like you submit your caption anonymously, and then the person gets chosen. So you could curate 4 memes or something like that and have them find text that supports each of those memes that then retells the story too. So you could do it in a couple different fashions that again speak to them, accessing the language in a meaningful modern way, that enables them to feel like that they're reading the language and they're not just in Latin class.
Yeah, and have them do a retelling of the story using emojis. Right, replace some words, retelling a story, and then you can, again, like Stephanie said, curate a few of those, and then the next year flip them. You read the emojis and see if you can figure out what's happening, and that becomes a pre-reading activity instead of a post-reading activity. And so these are things that you can definitely add to your toolboxes to make your classes more lively. But the more engaging you make the classes, and so that they're really invested in the readings, the better readers and students they're going to become for you.
Yeah, Katie, I just saw your entry in the chat about students reading a soundtrack with a different song for each section. You could do a similar concept for, I just happen to be focusing on Dies Festus because I think it was you maybe who put it in the chat. But what if you said, there are 4 characters or something represented in the story. If these characters were WWE superstars, what song would accompany them to the ring? So what would be sort of like their personal theme song that would carry with them? So with Galatea, maybe it's something that, she's like a mean girl or something like that. I don't know a song off the top of my head, but maybe she's singing Taylor Swift's Bad Blood or something, something that recognizes her actions in the story and kind of brings that to the forefront. Yeah, exactly. Looking at the pictures too, how does the picture lend itself to describing one of the characters versus another? And then, provide a text reference, like why would she look like that if she were in this story, in this, situated in this context, right? Is she annoyed? Is she happy? Is she angry? So do more of like an investigation then.
Yeah, and again, I know we kind of talked about for this webinar to be part of it, for it to be a practicum, and we apologize we're running out of time. And then you guys didn't get to do a lot of practicum, but this is again where we're going to plug it and say, hey, come and join us at the summer workshops where you can actually get connected with other people and hopefully have more time to collaborate. And feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions, if you need support. Sammy Smith and Patrick Yagi, they have the monthly Cambridge get together on Zoom as well. And so please, like there are so many of us, we're here to help you. If you have any questions, definitely don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. So, if you're still working through Candidatus after tonight and you're like, I really do need some actual suggestions, please reach out. We'd be happy to, open our inboxes and, provide some suggestions for you or, help you craft an activity that would make sense for you in your classes.
Well, Stephanie, William, thank you so much for another excellent webinar. And I know you didn't have as much time for the practicum as you had hoped, but it was just so good to remind everybody about the reading method, what it is, and then so many excellent practical examples of what you can do with the stories. Also, if any of you who attended this evening need a certificate, a professional development certificate, if you will just please contact me at training@cambridgelatin.org, training@cambridgelatin.org. I'll get a certificate to you in the next day or so. And on that note, we thank you for attending this evening and good night.
Valete omnes.
Valete omnes.